Agency selection report of the Office of Personnel Management, Federal Investigative Services by Chris Beklinski, Old Dominion University. Through this PowerPoint presentation, we will examine the objective, the history and demographics of the Office of Personnel Management, the Federal Investigative Services Division, as well as go over the scenario. We will go over Herbert Simon's decision making in the organization, and we will attempt to tie in his theory in relations to OPM's OPM's response to their cybersecurity attacks. The objective is to connect the decision-making processes made by OPM FIS, which is the Office of Personnel Management and Federal Investigative Services, in response to the 2015 cybersecurity attacks, to Herbert Simon's organizational decision-making theory. OPM history and demographics. OPM began in 1883 when was the signing of the Civil Service Act, which established the Civil Service Commission. In 1978, the Civil Service Commission was reorganized into 3 new organizations, which consisted of the Office of Personnel Management, Merit Systems Protection Board, and the Federal Relations Authority. And around 1958, OPM established Federal Investigative Services. This service supports over 100 different agencies, to include the FBI, the CIA, local law enforcement, the Department of Defense. OPM, these agencies really rely on OPM FIS to conduct background investigations, educational checks, credit checks, personal references, employment histories, immigration status, arrest records, residence records, and so on and so forth. There's approximately over 6,000 staff members that support 32 different departments. In 2014, fiscal year 14, just kind of give you a scope of their workload. They process over 728,000 background investigations. So here's a scenario in 2015. It was discovered that OPM had been hacked. Over 21.5 million former, current federal employees, as well as family members' information, personal identifiable information, was stolen. That was social security numbers, birthdays, addresses, an example. 5.6 million. It was later discovered that 5.6 million fingerprints were additionally stolen for people who completed what they call the Standard Form 86. It's a questionnaire that people fill out for background investigations when they apply for background investigations. Next, we'll talk about Herbert Simon. Herbert Simon was a staunch proponent of Verhebel's perspective. He was a firm believer that the decision-making process was just as important as the processes of the action. His works included developing a science of administration, which involves the value of a free domain for the construction of that particular science. It also involved a quest for general principles of administration's acceptance of efficiency as the criterion for the decision making, as well as the emphasis on hierarchy as well as the justifications. So his organizational decision-making theories was based off 4 phases that included define the problems, develop an alternative, select a solution, and implement the solution. Within those 4 phases, he talks about 2 decision-making procedures, which is program, non-program. We're going to discuss the non-program. Non-program decision-making is basically it's in response to something that didn't occur. There was no structural response. So there was nothing in place that when that incident occurred. So the tie-in, so in reference to the non-programmed, obviously the cybersecurity attacks, there was nothing, they didn't have no safeguards in place, nothing in response to that, because it was the first time of something of this magnitude had happened. So a non-programmed approach was identified. That kind of applies to this. OPM did follow the 4 phases of decision making, so they defined the problem. The problem was obviously the hack. They developed alternatives to how to respond to this in terms of they developed short and long-term goals. They selected the solution. The solutions were they sent notification letters out to all those that were affected. They offered free credit monitoring for 3 years. They also had the Department of Civilian Employee Assistance Program. They were on board, so they collaborated with another agency to help support financial issues and identity theft, as well as they had to halt on all the processing for background investigations. So in conclusion, how organizations approach the decision-making process is very important. While the events over at OPM was definitely unfortunate and affected millions of individuals, OPM took swift action. The leaders and managers at all levels of management over there understood the factors of the decision environment. They understood the values that were involved, and they were able to appropriately apply the frameworks to display effective decision making. Furthermore, action taken by OPM through the 4 phases of the decision-making process directly supports Herbert Simon's theory of non-program decision-making within an organization.